Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is Hawkcast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Go Iowa Awesome and Rivals.com. I'm your recruiting analyst and host, Eliot Clough, at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by publisher Adam Jacoby, and of course, our managing editor, Ross Binder. A whole lot of things happening over the last few days. Iowa men's basketball and women's basketball taking on Ohio State in the future, present, past, whenever you're listening to this. And of course, one big name picking Iowa out of the transfer portal, and that is Kadyn Proctor. Who would have thought we'd be saying that a year ago? Not me. Former Alabama starting OL. He was previously committed to Iowa, flipped on signing day to Alabama, and now he is back in Iowa City. Was at the men's basketball game yesterday, and man, I can tell you firsthand that is one large individual. First off. Second off, he is very excited to be an Iowa Hawkeye. And as we always do, I'm going to start off with you, Adam. First initial thoughts when this started to surface, and two, what you're thinking right now about Iowa, the offensive line, and the future for Kadyn Proctor.
Well, Eliot, first thought is when we first heard about this rumor last week, it seemed like something that would make sense. But my very first initial read was I was going to be on the list and will probably primarily function as a way to drive up his price for a Michigan or an Ohio State or a USC or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. From a purely football standpoint, that's what I was expecting. And that, just hearing from Kadyn after his transfer and recommitment and all that, that was the wrong way to look at it, because what he wanted to talk about was coming back home. What he wanted to talk about was the relationships that he had kept up with the Iowa coaching staff. What he wanted to talk about was his family didn't have to fly to games 12 to 15 times a year anymore. It'll still be 4 or 5, especially now in the nationwide Big Ten, but playing closer to home for home games is super important to him, regardless of like NIL money, right? Like, it's not like the Proctors won't be able to afford doing it or weren't able to afford doing it while he was playing for Alabama. Clearly not, right? But having to do it, regardless of the money, is tough. And he gets to come home now, right? He got to play for Alabama. He got to play in the playoffs. He got to be this top 10 national recruit. He got to do all that. And he didn't burn his relationships in the process. And now he's coming home in a situation where he now has the better relationship with the coaching staff than at Alabama. So that was really important to hear. And sort of speaks to probably why Kirk and the staff thought, yeah, we still want this kid. Absolutely. Ross, what were your thoughts in terms of what you thought this was going to mean for the line in general?
Well, I mean, I just, in terms of what it means for the line, I think this is it's the rock that they've been looking for at least since Tyler Linderbaum left. And honestly, given the difference in positions, it's more like the rock they've been looking for since Tristan Wirfs left many years ago at this point. They have not had that anchor at the tackle position for several years now, and we've seen the effects of that in the play of the offense. Now, I think we all know the offensive issues are deeper than just the offensive line and the tackle position, but that's a pretty fundamental place to start. And Iowa has been fairly weak at that position for several years running now. So yeah, getting Kaden Proctor to be able to fill one of those tackle positions, assumedly left tackle. It's what he played at Alabama. I think if he could handle left tackle at Alabama, it's not a stretch to see him filling in at left tackle in Iowa. So having him able to slide into that line, be that anchor, and be able to build around that, his presence, his enormous presence, as Eliot said. I mean, he is physically just a gigantic human being that fills up a lot of space, and just a crazy athletic human, like large human being too. Like, he's not just like big, like, large.
Aaron Gibson. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's incredibly exciting to finally have that piece on the offensive line because again, haven't had that for a while, and the results have really struggled. So there's still a lot of work to do on the offensive line, but having this as a starting point for the 2024 offensive line is huge. Like I think you have to dramatically reconsider the expectations for that unit now with him there. Then, before you're hoping, well, this is year 5 for Mason Richmond. This is year 3 for Jennings Dunker. Okay, that they've been in the system a long time. This is, hopefully where it's all gonna come together for them. And we still hope that they, continue to improve. We're gonna need depth on the line, and they're gonna be important players. But adding somebody like Proctor is just a huge transformation of the expectations and the ability of that unit.
So
Yeah, one of the things that really jumped out at me this season, 2023, was how much this line really missed Kadyn Proctor. And it's weird to say that about a player that was never on the roster to begin with, but especially seeing the regression from Mason Richmond from 2022 to 2023, which was unexpected to say the least. Had Proctor been there at left tackle, even with his struggles as a pass blocker, which Alabama saw plenty of, even with the fact that he's a true freshman and all that, he still graded plenty better than Mason Richmond. Plenty. And with how much Iowa's offense struggled, especially with opening up holes for the running backs, keeping their quarterback upright and undisturbed especially when Cade McNamara was still under center. Like he needed it arguably as much as Deacon Hill. Had Proctor been on this team, we're probably talking about at least an 11-win team. And we're probably not talking about this offense as having been shut out 3 times against the only 3 ranked teams that played, right? Proctor's a guy who graded out against Georgia as the best offensive lineman or best offensive tackle in conference championship games, right? That's a guy who goes up against elite competition and wins. He still needs to learn how to do it consistently, but he's got the talent and he's got the trajectory to do it. And the fact that I was getting that on the line, probably it might feel about a year too late for some Iowa fans, but come the 2024 season, I think it's going to be a short resentment for them once they see this line take that step forward. Eliot, do you agree?
Oh yeah, hell yeah. That's an easiest yes I've said probably in my life. You know, I want to speak to the play and the on-field product. The first thing I want to hit, and I think it's been addressed on Twitter, but I definitely want to say it here as well, this is where Iowa's staff is definitely not caught up in the 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s like we often hear from Kirk Ferentz. Like he talks about those stories a lot. I'll say that. So,
Yeah.
and the offense is obviously not exactly up to date currently, or it hasn't been for a while. And so the way the staff handled this is very indicative of their understanding the current state of college football. Because what did Tyler Barnes say on signing day about Proctor? It's like, well, he didn't exactly. I don't think they can actually say players' names at that point in time because they're not their players. But he said something to the effect of, "You never know what's going to happen. You never know with the transfer portal." And people were ripping him in the fall for the way he was playing at the start of the season. He's a true freshman playing in the SEC, 5-star or not, true freshman playing in the SEC. And people were ripping him. And what did Tyler Barnes do? He went on Twitter and said he's going to be just fine, more or less. I don't have the tweet in front of me, but paraphrasing. And what does he do? He enters the portal. First place he thinks about is Iowa.
Yep.
First place. That's what he told us. What he said is he wanted to hear out the new coaching staff at Alabama, DeBoer and whoever else he brought in. And There were other programs that reached out to him. I'm sure every P5 program in the country reached out to him right away out of the portal. He said he wanted to hear a few schools out. That probably means Ohio State. That probably means Georgia. That probably means USC, Oregon. Oregon was a school that was in on him late and people were worried about towards the later part of his recruitment. So for him to say, no, I want to play for George Barnett. No, I want to play at Iowa for Coach Ferentz. Tyler Barnes has been great with me throughout this whole process. That is just a pure reflection of the way that Iowa understands the current situation of college football. They didn't burn a bridge when they very easily could have. The fan base probably would have preferred it at that moment in time. That was a horrid time on Twitter. A horrid.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wasn't.
The fans had plenty of kerosene to burn those bridges. They were like, "Yep, we got the pitchforks and we got the torches too. Let's go!" Like
Exactly.
Man.
And I don't know that that's Iowa's. I don't think that would be Iowa's style in the first place. Even with.
No,
Go ahead, Ross.
I was going to say, I mean, that I think is a reflection of Kirk Ferentz's very even keel approach to management and coaching. Like we see that from him often. Like, you don't get too high after a win, you don't get too low after a loss. The 24-hour rule. And I think he takes that approach to team management aspects too. Like you're not gonna, even though you're mad or disappointed that this kid is flipped in the last minute before signing or last hours before signing day, it's like you're not gonna rip this kid. It's a bad look. Like you don't need to be ripping on an 18-year-old. You're not gonna win many battles that way. And B, like Tyler Barnes said, you never know anymore. Like the transfer portal means every door is at least halfway cracked open. So you don't want to do something rash and damage something that could happen in the future that would be good. So I've lost my train of thought now. So take over, Eliot.
So, but that's what I was getting to is one, I think it's a reflection of their understanding of things currently, but two, I also think that it's not Iowa style. That's what I was going to get to. And that you hit on, Ross, is I don't know that would be something they would do no matter how the fan base feels and no matter how 40 and 50-year-olds react to an 18-year-old decision. Golly. I mean, like I wasn't on the beat at that point in time. That was like a month before I ended up with Rivals, but
if that, a few weeks,
right. And in covering Iowa, the grand scheme of things in Iowa State, UNI Drake at my last position, you could tell. I mean, it was bad. And for him to say, I'm not going to let this reflect my decision or have an impact on my decision, again, as a presumed 19, 20-year-old, I think that's reflective of Kaden as well, for him to make that decision. And the Alabama fans, I'm assuming he did say they reacted similarly. It's like, well, Nick Saban, the greatest coach of all time, is no longer around. And it's a 19, 20-year-old. Maybe he should make a decision that he would like to make and end up in elsewhere. But Adam, you had something to say.
Yeah, the last thing that I'll say about this and how the Iowa staff wants to approach it is they also let's just remember that this is also a reflection of how Kadyn Proctor handled the whole situation. Because again, like fans see the decommitment on the eve of signing day, they were ready to go nuclear. They did go nuclear, and Kadyn even acknowledged it when he was talking with you guys at the game, and he just basically said, it's sort of what fan bases do. But I mean, Eliot, when we were down in Orlando and somebody brings up recruiting obliquely to Kirk Ferentz at one of the pressers, and that was enough of an opening for Kirk to have some choice words about a mentor of a recruit. And we think we know which recruit it was, but without being able to confirm it, I don't want to start throwing names around publicly, but we think we know which one it was. And it was a big deal recruit too. And he still had that grudge to hold. He still knew exactly who he was talking about. So you're not going to be able to jerk somebody like Kirk Ferentz around and then, come back and be like, by the way, is that scholarship still there? Right? Like just because Kadyn Proctor decommitted, there's right ways and wrong ways to go about it. And the staff, the Iowa staff, one, knows the difference, and two, acts on that difference, right? And so the fact that they were willing to not only like talk Kadyn up while he was struggling, and two, like, you know, talk to him, recruit him, bring him on back, like keep that relationship going. One, yes, we're talking about a 5-star tackle, but two, it is because Kadyn didn't give them a reason to be like, double birds, enough of you, buddy, right? He handled it the right way, even though fans didn't see it the same way because he didn't stay committed, right? So that tells me that he's a guy that the coaches still trust, even though he decommitted. That's a tough needle to thread, but I think Kadyn did it. Eliot, is that consistent with what you've heard too?
Yeah, I mean, I think our understanding of the of how things shook out and how Iowa has handled the whole thing is indicative of that. Also, in talking with him yesterday, you could tell. There's a big difference. There was a big difference for me. I don't want to speak for everybody because freshman year of college can be quite different for a lot of different people. But there's clearly a level of maturity there that Kadyn possesses that I don't think a lot of 18, 19, 20-year-olds possess. He was so initially it was just myself, Scott, and Chad that was walking over to Kadyn to talk with him a little bit. I just went over and took a picture. I was like, I don't know if we can talk to him. I don't know what this is going to look like, but those are the veterans. So I followed them over, and then it was just a swarm. And Kadyn was awesome. Kadyn was great about it, and he was answering every question to the best of his ability. And it was loud in there. He could have just been annoyed. He could have just been, I just want to enjoy this. He could have just been wanting to sit there with his new teammates because he was sitting with Trevor Lauk. He was sitting with, I think it was Leighton Jones and Marco Lainez, but he sat there with the media scrum and answered questions for 5-10 minutes, and then later on he was back in the back areas, the tunnel of Carver, and there was another media scrum, and he was sitting there taking questions and answered them to the best of his ability. And Ross, I believe you were the one who wrote the article about his first interview as a Hawkeye. You saw some of the quotes. I mean, to me, it's a kid that is mature beyond his years, that's ready to work, and that is excited about being a Hawkeye.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that 100%. I was definitely impressed by the maturity, that really came through in those answers, and just kind of his tone, and just like he seemed really at ease and comfortable in that situation, which I think would be easy not to be. I mean, just these reporters kind of descend on you, not expectedly. You're at the game, there's a lot going on. It would have been easy to be kind of like irritable or just kind of thrown off, but he did not seem to be that way at all. He was, seemed totally at ease, really comfortable answering questions, gave some really good answers, some really thoughtful answers, and showed just a lot of maturity, and talking about, especially the stuff about the fan bases, like recognizing that fan bases are going to do what fan bases do, which is they're going to blow up when things go badly, and they're going to be love you when they're great. And he has the maturity to realize that it doesn't, you can't get too caught up in that it's just, it is what it is. Enjoy the good times and don't get too caught up in the bad times, as long as hopefully no one's getting too personal or too nasty like that. You don't ever want to see that. But yeah, I was just really, really impressed with how he handled himself yesterday, and it made me,
Ross,
even more excited, to get him, on the team next year. And you guys are going to get to interview him, I'm sure, hopefully during the weekly sessions, and just hearing from him, I think will be really great.
Russ, you had mentioned real quick that there was some like pretty obvious discomfort with like trying to do this whole media scrum like at a basketball game. Like you even like see in the video, like Eliot, what was it that like Kaden is like bent over like this the entire time.
Yeah.
And, like, was he like sitting in a seat, or why was he bent over like that? What was going on there?
It was loud as hell in there, and he was just trying to
Oh,
hear.
so he just couldn't see, or couldn't
Yeah.
hear. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So there was obvious, I mean, you guys know what it's like in Carver before a game. Band is blasting, and the band was right there. He was right next to the band. So that plus they're playing music, and we're gonna get to it, but that was the best environment that they've had for a men's basketball game this season, by far, by far. So yeah, and we'll get to that later, but yeah, that was the reason he just couldn't hear him.
Got it.
And we were lucky on that video to get decent audio. There was a time when he was like this at the camera, and I was just making sure we could hear him. But yeah. Now, as we transition to the on-field product now, Adam, you hit on it, talking about Mason Richmond's PFF grades, who has been the 3-year starter at left tackle and has just continued to struggle, hasn't gotten better. What's the outlook of the offensive line now with Kaden Proctor at left tackle? Where does Mason Richmond go? Does he go to the bench? Like what are we talking about here with how things shift? Because all 5 of those guys who started throughout the season, I guess, other than Rusty Feth, you replace him with Nick DeYoung, who did start the season at left guard. What do we expect to happen there for the offensive line in 2024? How do things shift around?
Well, obviously, you've got to look at moving Mason to either. I don't think that he's a viable candidate to overtake Dunker at right tackle. So you start to think, is he a guy that we can trust at guard? Because otherwise, and we're talking about a guy who hasn't really played guard in a meaningful capacity for the Hawkeyes, except for his freshman season, right? So they moved him to tackle for a reason. And for the first couple years as a starting tackle, he was all right, right? He was, grading better as a run blocker than a pass blocker, but he was all right. And for whatever reason this year, fell off the cliff. And I know that injuries had something to do with it, but Richmond sort of fell off the cliff as a run blocker, never really improved as a pass blocker. And you end up at some pretty poor PFF grades after that. I don't think that he's as bad as his grades indicate. One, because we've seen him, play better according to the grades, and two, I wasn't really expecting them to be as bad as they were just from an eye test standpoint. I mean, Eliot, we only see these reps once, 99% of the time, right? And we're seeing them usually from about 400 feet away and without the benefit of TV cameras or replay or anything like that. But it always seemed like I didn't think Richmond was playing worse than he did the last 2 years when the line was awful. I didn't the numbers didn't click with that. That being said, Proctor's an obvious upgrade. and Proctor is a guy that Alabama would not move J.C. Latham back to left tackle for. And Latham is, or it's either Lathan or Latham. I got the first 5 letters right, I guarantee you. But he's another one of those like 360, like NFL prototype walking mountain type dudes who could have absolutely played left tackle for Bama. They could have started Proctor at right tackle, and you'll work your way over there, and it might have worked, might have not, but that was a plan that would have been on the table if Nick Saban were not confident in Kadyn Proctor. Never moved him, and you saw that improvement from Proctor over the course of the season, and improvement when he's playing SEC competition, no less, in SEC West, right? We're talking about the biggest of the big guns. And if Nick Saban keeps that faith, why on earth would Kirk Ferentz not, right? Like, if left tackle is open for Proctor at Alabama, it is absolutely open for him at Iowa. So we had, and I mentioned that because we had heard some folks say, well, where does Proctor fit in? Proctor fits in where he wants to fit in, and that's left tackle, right? Like, that is, we start there, we work from there. It is not, Proctor having to adapt himself to Iowa's line. It's the other way around.
Nobody else on the offensive line at Iowa has earned that right, in my opinion.
Yeah. Mason Jones, or Logan Jones, excuse me. Logan Jones at center. You don't think so?
I mean, I thought Tyler Ellsbury was better this year.
Well, we saw Jones when he was not at 100%. Like Ellsbury, when Ellsbury was in the game at center, he was healthier than Jones was. But like, yeah, I'll say this. It makes Proctor has more of that privilege than Jones does. I would agree with that. Absolutely.
And there were moments where Connor Colby was good at right guard as well.
Mm-hmm.
But
sure,
again, Kaden Proctor has that locked up at left tackle. Now, you said that Jennings Dunker, like moving Mason Richmond to right tackle, is not viable. Explain that a little bit, because that was initially my thought, was they moved Mason Richmond to right tackle because like there's just kind of this general like knowing that your left tackle should be your best offensive lineman. So there's the thought that Mason Richmond, that'll translate to a less pivotal position on the offensive line at right tackle. Jennings Dunker has experience at right guard. You move him to right guard. You move Connor Colby back to left guard, who had been there before. And Nick DeYoung is no longer a starter on the offensive line. That, because he is valuable at probably 4 of the 5 positions as a backup. But you probably don't want Nick DeYoung to be your starter at guard. Now, why is that? Why did you think that wasn't viable, Adam? Is it because of that awful PFF grade? Like what is it there?
Well, so it's sort of a mixture of two things. One, that Mason had played for his college career exclusively on the left side of the line and almost exclusively left tackle. Right, his other reps were at left guard as a freshman, and that pretty clearly wasn't the long-term plan. And so it's one, it's that, and two, it's that Richmond hasn't really earned the right to. He doesn't look like a guy who's going to push Dunker out of that spot, right? So if you're moving him positionally to a side of the line that he hasn't played on, he may have practiced there, right? But Iowa has not looked at him as their solution on the right side of the line for his entire career, right? And so Dunker has performed better than Richmond, or at the very least, Dunker had a better graded out season. And eye test wise, I think was a little bit better than Richmond at right tackle, right? So if you're going to move Richmond to an unfamiliar place, it should be for a starting spot. And I don't think that Richmond is a serious contender to like uproot Dunker at right tackle. So maybe the move here is, Richmond's your first backup offensive tackle on both sides. You get him ready for that. You have him behind Proctor, and if something awful happens or Proctor tweaks an ankle and has to miss a game against UNI or what have you, you've got a guy with starting experience. You're fine. You're good. Same thing goes with Dunker. Something bad happens. He commits wire fraud and he's in jail for a few weeks. No, sorry, that's Michigan State. That's Iowa doesn't bring guys back from jail. Michigan State does that anyway. But if Dunker's out too, at the very least, Richmond's a guy that you can, I think, trust over there, or at the very least have him in a competition with some of these younger guys that have come in too, because there's going to be some young, hungry dudes on this line coming up real quick. So that you're going to have to worry about how you mix those guys in too. But ultimately, yeah, I think Richmond right now looks like guy number 6 or 7 on this line. And hey, look, it's better than being guy number 16 or 17, isn't it? But it's, he's sort of earned his way there too, right?
Yeah. So Ross, what do you think this starting 5 on the offensive line looks like next season?
Great question. I'm really interested to see spring practice to see how things are shaking out there. Where is Richmond practicing? Are they trying him at right tackle? Are they trying him at left guard? Is he just strictly backing up Proctor? I think that will be a really interesting development to see where he's working. But right now, if you wanted to just kind of talk about what the starting five should look like or could look like, I think you're going to look at Proctor at a left tackle, probably DeYoung starting at left guard, unless someone. I think that's probably the most open spot where if someone really turns up in the spring or summer and is like, hey, I've taken that leap, I'm ready to play more. I think that's the position where someone could come up and take it. And then Logan Jones at center, if he's healthy, I think he's still the guy there. Connor Colby at right guard. I think he's been all over the line, but that seems like it's his best position. So I think he'll probably lock that down. And then Dunker at right tackle. Seems like like Adam said, he was the steadier option at tackle this season, and I can definitely see him, maintaining that this next season. So that's kind of where I think the line looks right now, at least.
Now, when we're talking about that left guard spot, to me, if it's not DeYoung, if it's not Colby, if Colby sticks at right guard, the guy who steps up, and a guy that we've talked about here a variety of times, is Cade Piper. He's going to be a redshirt freshman. He's a guy that gained a ton of weight in that first year and gained it well and earned some reps on the offensive line as the year went along. I mean, it was garbage time reps, but it's reps as a freshman, which are important. And he's a guy that's come in and really impressed. Trevor Lauk is expected to be an offensive tackle. So, unless he comes in and overtakes Jennings Dunker, I don't think that's going to be him getting reps anytime soon, consistent snaps. And then the only other thought, which I don't exactly expect to transpire at left guard, would be one of these guys who's had issues with injuries, like Mislinski or is it Crow? Krogh? You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, I think it's Croft, but that's again, that's something that we'd have to double check here.
Bit of a reach. And then if it'd be really difficult for Cody Fox, and I don't want to put that expectation on him, but he is a 4-star, and he is about 300 pounds already coming in. He did not enroll early. The only offensive lineman in the 24 class that enrolled early is Josh Janowski. I think he's a little bit far away from, a few years away from potentially earning a spot on that offensive line. So other than that, I do think for now it's going to be between Piper and DeYoung, the way we look at it, the left guard spot, as long as things shake out like we're expecting them to currently, with Jennings Dunker staying at right tackle.
I'll throw one name out there too. One, you were right, it was pronounced Crow, and two, Tyler Ellsbury can both push Logan Jones at center or also be the starting left guard too, right? We've seen a little bit of flexibility there. You look back to a guy like James Daniels, who was trusted at both guard and center for Iowa. You could start to see Ellsbury, if he's one of the 5 best, and I could see a world where he is, you could see him push there at left guard and also be the backup center too. That is not unprecedented in Iowa system too. So I'd say there are 3 minimum quality options at left guard there too. So even though we don't know who that starter is going to be, I think this is a situation with options, a good problem as opposed to a bad problem. Do you guys how many of those names that we've thrown out here are you guys confident in? Because I'd say about 2 or 3 for me. Do you guys agree?
Looking at left tackle, I think, or sorry, left guard. Yeah. There's 3 names that have been said, and it's DeYoung, it's Piper, and it's Ellsbury as possibilities that I look and see, at least, and have a level of confidence based on what we've seen, right? Like, you could say Fox, but we just haven't seen him at the college level yet. And he played at East Buchanan. Like, he's gonna have a learning curve. So it's one thing to look at Kadyn Proctor, a 5-star who played at Southeast Polk, and then look at Cody Fox, a 4-star who played at East Buchanan, and then that's just a reflection of his experience. That's not a reflection of his talent or anything like that exactly for Fox
or potential. Yeah,
right,
yeah.
because potential, especially because he's been a 4-star since he committed to Iowa. Like I think he was a freshman going into his sophomore year, so he was the first one in
A
that.
rising sophomore.
Right.
Yes.
So, and I think the Ellsbury at left guard is a good point too, because if Jones gets hurt, you can shift Ellsbury to center and then put Nick DeYoung right there at left guard. Because if he's your 6th, 7th guy, you can plug him in a variety of spots. I mean, he played right tackle this year when Jennings Dunker was hurt. They didn't put Dejon Parker in there. So that speaks to his versatility. Whether he's going to be, particularly high level at any of these positions is one thing, but the versatility is there for DeYoung. He's experienced. He knows what he's doing in a variety of spots. Now, we've talked about the scholarship issue previously. I believe it's public, so they're at 92 scholarships by our count. I've heard other podcasts talk about it, so we'll just put that number out there. 92 scholarships because Doctorman did confirm that Fisher is coming back, by the way. I know we've talked about that a little bit and we didn't address it fully, but Dr. Min did confirm that, on a couple different podcasts that I've heard him say. So,
Okay.
92 scholarships, and you need to be at 85 by the time the fall rolls around. So, what the hell are they going to do? Somebody transfers. That, and maybe you start looking at medical retirements, where guys are either done and they finish their careers at Iowa, or they enter the portal and maybe try to figure it out elsewhere. But it's not Iowa style to kick guys off the team,
No.
What else are we talking about here? I don't know that we should necessarily throw names out there, specific names, but you've got 7 scholarship running backs going into next season. 2 of them are true freshmen.
Yeah.
And
I think it's a good, bringing up that situation. I think that's one of those positions where, you hate to say figure itself out, but it kind of will figure itself out. Like they're going to see how things stack up in the spring, and probably at least one of those guys is going to say, hey, I don't know where the path is to me getting carries is here. Maybe I should look for somewhere else, So I think you see some of that, but you're right. I mean, 92 scholarships means 7 you got to free up somewhere. That's a fair number, actually. So it'll be interesting to see how that works itself out. Gray shirting is another option. They don't use it a ton. That just kind of kicks the can down the road. I don't know that they would do that here. I think probably just kind of natural transfers of kind of log jammed positions is probably going to be a big one. And then, the medical hardship or medical scholarships, that's some guys are, unfortunately just don't have any kind of good luck when it comes to injuries. It seems like at their playing careers. And, we could definitely see probably 1 or 2 guys where that kind of becomes an option that, hey, I'm sorry this didn't work out, but, we'll keep you on scholarship to finish your degree and so on.
We've seen Iowa go that route with the medical medical exemptions and scholarships and all that a few times. And we've seen it as a sort of a growing trend in college football too. And last offseason, we saw the situation where Iowa tried to medically exempt Terry Roberts, Scary Terry. And he said, hang on, I didn't say I was done. And, he tried to make it work at Michigan State and at Miami. Something else was going on there. And, more power to him, just, figure it all out. But regardless, we've seen Iowa do that. And it is, even if the athletes might not agree, it is an avenue that they've gone down before. And it's a lament that they've had with offensive line. It's just, how these guys' health is affecting them or not affecting them. So yeah, that's a situation where you could potentially see it happening, and you might even see players be like, "What?" Right? Because we do see this like 7 scholarship, or at the very least, it's a public 7 scholarship. Um, Transparency is not the right word. A 7 scholarship. What's the word that I'm looking for? Discrepancy. There we go. Use your words, Adam. But we don't always see that from Iowa, because Kirk has been pretty famously disciplined in terms of like, where's the scholarship going to come from before we offer it to somebody else. But we've also seen Tyler Barnes be very, very, very coy about what their scholarship situation is. And we've seen it it's manifested a few different ways too. One, they kept Reese Dakin entirely under wraps for months, coming out of Australia. And so when he committed, everyone's like, how did Iowa just do that? Like, how did nobody hear about this guy? And, they moved in silence, like real G's and lasagna. And when somebody asked during signing day, when somebody asked Tyler Barnes about that scholarship situation, his answer was more or less, wouldn't you like to know? Right? Like, they are more into the non-public information. They're more into the like, all right, privately we know where we are where we need to be, but we'll just hang on to that information, right? So presumably, they're not in Iowa City. They're not trying to figure out where 7 scholarships are going to come from, but they're probably trying to figure out where 2 or 3 are. So it'll be interesting to see how that whole situation shakes out. If they're able to, I guess for lack of a better term, lose 7 dudes and hopefully not ruin the relationships in the process. That's going to be sort of tricky information if they don't have 7 of those 92 guys who want to leave Iowa City, right? Are there more than 85 guys that want to be in Iowa City right now? Because I could see a situation where that is the case, and that is a situation to be in for both a staff and a roster. So for those people's sake, I would hope that they're a lot closer to that 85 mark than we think they are, right? Eliot, do you agree?
Yes. I think, I don't know how you can dip into the portal at all anymore. There was that conversation about Ty Thompson and maybe trying to get another quarterback, but like, is Deacon leaving? Because I don't know what you're gonna do there, and I don't know why the hell Deacon would go anywhere else. You're not getting this type of facilities and treatment and ability to learn and all that type of stuff from Fordham. That's why he ended up at Iowa.
Yeah.
I don't.
And he's now got player teammate relationships that he would have to just start all over again at a D or an FCS school too. Like, that move would not make sense for him.
Right. Exactly. For a variety of reasons, because he's not going to get another P5 offer after this year. No chance. So that's definitely something to monitor, how things happen throughout spring ball, because that's when you're going to be able to look to potentially add guys out of the portal too. That's what happened with Nick Jackson and Caleb Brown. Caleb Brown specifically entered the portal and then came in after spring ball. That's going to be your best bet. You still have to think they need some help at wide receiver. You still have to think they could use maybe some help at offensive line other than Proctor, but I don't think they're going to go there. You think they could use some more depth at quarterback? I don't really think they need any help on the defensive side of things, with Jamari coming back at corner specifically, and then you got the Sean Lee, TJ Hall, etc. You got your safeties back, you got your linebackers, you got your entire linebacking core back. You got your defensive line pretty much D-tackle. You maybe could if you had a scholarship open. But, like, I don't know how the hell they do anything there. And like, by the way, another guard position guy that we didn't mention is Bo Stevens. He came in and played.
Oh, yeah.
That's another guy that could play at the guard spot. So they've got options. It's just what I think Iowa fans' concern will be is if they have it figured out at the start of the season, which they won't. Like, nobody does, especially when you have depth at a position. But there's going to be some bumps in the road in figuring out who your 5 guys are. I mean, there's a reason Feth didn't start until later on in the year. They were rotating him and DeYoung at that left guard spot. So, like, I don't know how they figure this out. And I don't know how they looked at this situation. And granted, it was different at the time, but and said, yeah, Nick DeYoung, come back. You know, like he was the first one that announced he was coming back. And that was prior to the other guys announcing they were back. Maybe they just like, yeah, we'll take what we can get there at the offensive line spot, but that's one that's tough because he's not Jay Higgins, he's not Nick Jackson, he's not Quinn Schulte. Like he's a guy that will, you hope he can contribute regularly next season. Not, I don't know that he's going to take a leap in year 5 or year 6 or whatever it is, but it's going to be something that is probably going to be more sorted out after spring ball when guys enter the portal then. And you look at the running back position, you look at linebacker, you look at offensive line. Those are those 3 spots where you're going to see guys probably enter the portal and go elsewhere. Maybe wide receiver. I don't know. I mean, like Alex Moda didn't see the field this year. Dayton Howard didn't. Jarriett Bowie did as a freshman. And I'm not saying any of these guys are in another portal. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that these are positions where there's a lot of guys there, and it's more likely that one guy gets frustrated and says, okay, there's going to be other places I can go. That's all I'm saying.
Especially at a position that doesn't have a coach right now.
Yeah. That is a good point. And we will see who that will be. And speaking of which, Iowa's still searching for that OC spot. They have not filled it yet, as well as wide receiver. You have to assume that goes hand in hand. Whoever the OC is probably going to bring in their wide receiver coach. Still hearing different things, still hearing non-answers as well. They're keeping this one very tight to the vest right now, kind of across the board. And so we're hearing different things, potentially a college position, potentially a college hire, potentially an internal hire, potentially an outside hire, potentially an NFL hire, and they're in the playoffs. This has got to get done. I maintain everything that I said, and that I can't speak for you guys, but I maintain everything I said on the last pod. This has got to get done here sooner rather than later before spring ball starts, obviously. You gotta get your guys in, and you have to think that Proctor knew something or was told something before he committed to Iowa without an offensive coordinator, right?
Yeah.
You would hope, I think.
I mean, with a guy like 2024 quarterback signee James Reeser, he signed because he trusts Kirk and because he likes the program, or he loves the program, is what he told me. Is that what Kaden's doing too? I mean,
he singled out his relationships with Ferentz and George Barnett when he was talking to you guys yesterday. So I mean, those are, I think, probably the 2 most important positions, or coaches for him. And honestly, whoever the offensive coordinator is, I don't know that Caden's job is going to be all that different, I guess. But yeah, you'd hope that there's some progress going on in that search, and that that they're maybe telling Kaden a little bit of something. But yeah, it's a messy situation. I agree. I stand by what we discussed last week, that like this process has been too long, too opaque, too drawn out. Just, it's been a mess, and I don't. You cannot hold up this as any sort of a reasonable coaching hire. I think is an example of a reasonable coaching hire. Like this is an example of how not to do a coaching search and a coaching hire, in my opinion, because it's dragged on for so long. It's just become such a cluster that it's ridiculous. And hopefully there's a good ending to all of this, nonsensical process, but it's hard to see that right now. I will say that.
If it's an internal hire, this will be the most anticlimactic, and I know anticlimactic probably doesn't do it justice. Like the most.
Oh, there will be a climax.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And it'll result in the University of Iowa getting burned to the ground. Fan base. Like I initially my thought was anticlimactic, and I was like, "Ooh, I don't know. No, that'd be bad. And like, who do we talk about when we talk about an internal hire? Talk about George Barnett. We talk about John Budmeyer. And as much as players vouch for these guys, that only does
Both of them.
so much. And it can only reflect your intelligence when it comes to football and your aptitude as an offensive coordinator at the P5 level so much. So if that's what transpires, man, Kirk really went for a yes man. I'll tell you that. That's what that tells me. And here's hoping for our sake, because we have to watch it. That doesn't happen. So
well, speaking of, I just wanted to, one note on Barnett though. I was, this kind of ties into the Proctor discussion too. Is, I think getting Proctor it's a great thing, but it also increases the pressure on Barnett. There's been a lot of discussion about his performance and the offensive line's performance over the last few years. Not great. He's finally got that piece now. He's got that anchor. He's got that 5-star left tackle, that guy that, we're all going to hope is an NFL draft pick in the first round in 2-3 years. That's the guy. He's got that now. And now I think it's incumbent on him to make that offensive line. It's got to work. Like, it's got to be a better unit, a better performing unit, a more consistent unit than what we've seen the last couple of years. Like, this is kind of the buck stops here moment for Barnett and the line, I think. Adam, you got something to add?
Yeah, we're talking about a coach who has now 3 years of experience coaching the Iowa line, and they're 3 of the roughest years of the line, but I think there is at the very least some green shoots. The line is clearly better than it was in 2021, and probably better than it was in 2022. And I think this 24 line is going to be even better too. So at the very least, there is some improvement being made under George Barnett. But Ross, you're absolutely right. If somehow he doesn't figure out how to make Kaden Proctor work, if he can't get an anchor out of that situation, assuming Proctor's healthy, right? If disaster strikes, then this entire discussion is worthless regardless. But as long as Proctor's healthy, if Barnett can't figure out how to start there and have him be the anchor and build off of that, might be time to see what else is out there. But I don't expect that to happen though. The coaches or Kirk Ferentz loves the guy. The players, every time we talk to an offensive line recruit, Eliot, it's Coach Barnett, Coach Barnett, Coach Barnett, Coach Barnett, and unprompted, and in ways that don't come off as lip service, right? These are solid relationships that these linemen and their coaches and their families have with Barnett, right? And so that I don't expect to change, and I don't expect him to not succeed once he has this Kaden Proctor 5-star. Like, now that he's got his cheat code, I don't think it's going to be worse for the line. I really don't. But it is something that, all right, here you go, right? And this was sort of the situation where we were with Brian Ferentz last year. Once all those transfers came in on offense. Now, obviously, things went south with those in ways that are not Brian Ferentz's fault, by and large. But it was, in 2023, at this time, it was all right, Brian, here you go. And now it's all right, Kirk or Barnett, here you go. All right. The personnel is right now no longer the gripe. You don't get to fall back on that one in 2024. It was valid in 21 and in 22, and to some extent this year. But now, Ross, you mentioned it before we were recording. Richmond was not a Barnett guy. And whatever you guys want to say about position coaches recruiting the guys that they want, I personally, I think a position coach ought to be able to make somebody else's recruits work. But, recruiting is a little bit tricky and a little bit dependent on your vision for a position. And those visions can change a lot. Gosh, look at the wide receiver situation once Greg Davis came in, about a decade ago. Like that blew up Iowa's passing game for years because their visions of wide receivers were different than they were before. Regardless, the excuses of, well, our guys aren't in there yet, or it's somebody else's recruit, or well, we had all these injuries in 2021 and 2020. Those are all gone. Here it is. Here is everything on paper that the Iowa offensive line needs to succeed in 2024. They've got returning experience. They've got 5-star first-round NFL potential at left tackle, the one position where you really, really want that. They have a coach that apparently everybody loves, and I take them at their word. And every time, Eliot, that we've talked to Coach Barnett, super impressive dude, right? It's all here. Now they've got to turn it into success. And the fans are not going to have a long leash and a lot of patience for that success either, because Kaden's here now. And with all that expectation and all of that, like, these guys are ready now. All right. Like, Kinnick is not going to be happy with stacks and, 3 and outs, et cetera, et cetera. Those days are over. I think fans understood to some extent that this was a rebuild on the line, and rebuilds take time. Some fans were more patient than others about that, right? And some fans were like, look, I get it, but also I don't want to see this anymore. I've had a few of those in my mentions too. Realistically, this is 2024 is really looking like the line where you don't have to see that bad play anymore. And if this is not a really, really good year for offensive line play in Iowa City, either something bad has happened with health again, which we've seen a few times recently, or it's probably insufficient coaching. Like, do you guys agree with that assessment that this is the year for Iowa's line to be back?
When we're talking about recruiting, his guys are starting to enter the room, right? Like, obviously, Proctor was one of his guys. Proctor couldn't be anybody's guy. Yeah. Top 5, like 5-star, top 5 guy in the country, or excuse me, he was the top offensive tackle in the 23 class. And a top 10 recruit in the class as well. But you're starting to talk about Proctor. You're starting to talk about Piper. I'm having trouble making a distinction. The juniors, so Dunker, Stevens, Mislinski, and Little, those were Barnett's guys, correct? That was his first class? Either that or that was the last class from before him. I don't know. Either way, if it is, they've had him for a while. We'll say that. They've had Barnett for a while. That's Dunker, that's Stevens. Then you look at the senior year guys, and they've had Barnett for a while. DeYoung, Ellsbury, Logan Jones, Mason Richmond, Connor Colby. Like, you give him a little bit of leeway, right? Those first few years, you had Linderbaum and nothing else. And then it was just straight up nothing else after that. And
yeah.
Kirk Ferentz believes in this guy too. He's gone to bat for him every single time he's had the opportunity to. And like you mentioned, the recruits like him, players like him. One quote that I got from Jack Lang, he's a 4-star recruit out of Missouri. I believe he's 6'8", 300 pounds. He's getting recruits or offers from all over the country. This quote from him on Barnett, which you can have access to the full article on iowa.rivals.com/subscribe if you want to check out that if you're not a premium subscriber. Jack Lang said, I'm not, or Barnett said to Lang, I'm not going to kiss your ass. On nights before my games, I'm going to be texting my guys. I'm not going to be texting you. I want you, but I'm not going to kick your, or I'm not going to kiss your ass. I hope he doesn't kick his ass either. I'm not going to kiss your ass. And recruits that end up at Iowa love that. They love that type of thinking. And you're getting your guys in the room now. What do you do with it?
One quick thing: the 2021 class that Dunker and Colby, et cetera, David Koff was the name that you had thrown out. Those were all those guys all signed before Coach Barnett came, so not his guys.
He started in March
for whatever it's worth. Yeah,
but they've been here the whole time he was here.
Yeah. And at some point, especially on a developmental position like offensive line, develop, right? Like, even if he's not your guy, at some point, like, just get him ready to play, right? And to some extent, these guys have been ready to play. But where's that next step going to come from? Like, at some point, just because you did or didn't recruit them only matters so much.
Bingo. Now, one thing we got to talk about before we get you out of here, Adam, because you got to cover that Iowa Ohio State women's basketball game. Let's talk men's basketball before we get you out of here. Big game yesterday at Carver. Again, I think you factor in Proctor committing, you factor in the fact that the number 2 team in the country was there, Zack Edy, reigning National Player of the Year. That environment was the best one I've experienced at Carver by far with the men. The fans were crazy. I mean, Ross, you were watching. I don't know how much you got to watch of the game, Adam, but Peyton Sanford hit that 3 for them to go up, and Carver went nuts. And it's unfortunate that Zack Edy was part of the picture for Iowa, because finished with 30 points and 18 rebounds. There's only so much you can do with a guy who's that skilled at 7'4". And referees didn't know how to officiate him. Like that was apparent. I think he shot 15 free throws to Iowa as a team who shot 16. So that's pretty indicative of the situation at hand. I still think Iowa's on the correct trajectory. They've got a great a schedule that's conducive to winning ahead. We'll say that. Play Maryland on Wednesday, but there were some issues. There was an issue of rebounding. They were out rebounded 50-24. Adam, I don't know if you saw my article headline. I was pretty happy about that.
Oh yeah. I was going to bring it up if you didn't.
I was going to say, I was writing it and I was like, oh, Adam's going to love this. So if you missed it, it was the score and then an old fashioned glass kicking. And that's what it was.
It's so good.
Thank you. But it was. I mean, sometimes the ball just doesn't bounce your way. And then sometimes you play a team that has a 7'4" guy. Officials don't know how to officiate. And arguably your best player, freshman Owen Freeman, doesn't get a lot of respect on the court as well. He's 6 inches shorter than the guy, and he's not getting any help from the officials. And also condolences to the Freeman family. His grandma passed away on Friday. And Iowa recruit Braden Freeman, Owen's little brother, as well. Condolences to them and their family. So playing with a heavy heart and a tough matchup, man. And like, I'm going to give Owen Freeman flowers just about every game. And this was like probably the most impressed I've been. He was about as physical with Edy as he can be, as the refs were allowing him to be. And there was one play where he got the ball, I think at the left elbow, took a dribble, went into Edy's chest with his shoulder, and put a left-handed layup in. And I was like, hell yeah, that's what you need from your freshman. That's what you need from a guy who's becoming one of the better players, the 6-time freshman of the week. And it was not given an advantageous whistle. And Fran McCaffrey let everybody know post-game. I asked him, oh God, the way I phrased the question, I said, You're out. Explain the rebounding discrepancy. That's how I phrased it. I was like, oh damn it, he's gonna be pissed. But he he said, I would like to see my 6-time freshman of the week get a little more respect. That was it. And so lots of things to take away, lots of positives, still the negatives. There's only so much you can do when your power forward also comes down, I think, with 3 rebounds, 2 rebounds. Ben Cricky, you brought him in to score, not to exactly get a bunch of boards, not exactly to play great defense. And, it kind of reared its ugly head, I guess, in that game. Those are the the overlying things for me. Ross, how about you?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, this isn't a great rebounding Iowa team. They just in general. Now I think probably Peyton Sanford is their second best rebounder. I think, God bless Peyton Sanford, he does a lot of things really well. If he's your second best rebounder, I think there's some issues there with the team construction and the distribution of skills. Like, you just need more rebounding and more big guys that can rebound rather than your wings. Although he's very good at it, props to him. And yeah, when Freeman, he's your best rebounder, and he's limited by the whistles, by playing a 7'4", just mammoth of a human being in Edy. So that it's just the odds of a happy ending to that story yesterday, the Iowa Purdue game, were just not good. Like, to me, the thing Iowa needed to have happen. They needed to be a little bit better on the rebounding somehow. Like, I don't know how exactly, but you can't get out rebounded the way they did and win a game. That's just not going to happen. And number 2 is they needed to hit threes, and they just were not. The threes were not falling for them, especially in the second half and towards the end of the game. They talked about it after the game that there was some fatigue issues. Maybe, they went the final 4 minutes of the game without a bucket, without a free throw, without any points of any kind. Obviously not going to win many games doing that. Because, Purdue roared out to a pretty big lead. They got it up to 19 points, I think, at one point in the second half. Just like, it looked like, okay, this is going to be like the West Lafayette game where they just, it's a blowout, thanks for coming. But Iowa, to their credit, they battled back. They got it closer. They struggled to get it under that kind of 11-point threshold for a while. And then they finally got it down to 8. And they had several possessions in a row where they actually got some stops on defense, had chances on offense, make a shot, get it to 6, get it to 5, make a couple shots, get it to 4. And they just couldn't do it. Shots weren't falling. There were no offensive rebounds. So that was hard too. But, they had some chances to maybe make things interesting at the end. And, it seemed like they just kind of ran out of gas. Like you, I don't think this is an indictment of this year's team in any way. It's just Purdue's a really, really good team, number 1. And number 2, really, really bad matchup for this particular Iowa team. Like, the things they're really good at are things Iowa is kind of bad at. So it's just, you put those together, you're going to have games like yesterday more often than not. Like, they play 10 times. Purdue's going to win at least 9 of them, probably. So yeah, it's just kind of the way that works. So I'm still very optimistic about this team for the rest of the year. And I think, like you said, the schedule is more favorable. So, they just got to keep playing the way they've been playing. And I think there are going to be some good results over the next few weeks.
I agree with you, Ross. And I was going to make that point as well. It was 444. They didn't make a field goal from the field, which is not going to be conducive to getting back in that game. Again, it was within 8 at that point in time. Purdue ends up winning by 14. So it's just about making shots. And I'm looking at the stats here. Purdue had 19 offensive rebounds to Iowa's 4, and Iowa had 24 rebounds total.
Yeah, Iowa had plenty more misses to corral than Purdue did too. And guys, you mentioned that Freeman was sort of in that tough matchup. And not only is Freeman going up against a guy who was, 6 inches taller than him, which he's probably never going to have to encounter again in his career, unless he goes to the NBA and he's got some 7'6" stiff from Lithuania to deal with. But that's almost never going to happen. And 2, Edy is skilled. Like, he is if you ever see anyone say, "Oh, he's just tall," incorrect. Like that person doesn't know ball, because Edy has really remarkable footwork for a guy. Like even if you were just 7 feet tall, his footwork would be pretty darn good. It's really good for a 7'4" guy. Heavens FX, who God bless him, one of the best tweeters in all of like Hawkeye fandom, and he's probably going to do about 15 deep fakes off of this podcast now that we've mentioned him. But he posted a video. He was like, why is Zack Edy in the lane for 10 seconds straight? Like, look at all these 10 seconds. And if you actually watch that footwork, he keeps resetting it. Like he knows what he's doing. He's a skilled big man who just happens to be 7'4", as opposed to a 7'4" big man who happens to have skills, right? And he came in as a 7'4" guy without those skills. And Painter happens to be this Goliath whisperer, apparently, because you're 7'3", you go to Purdue and you turn into a great player, I guess, or at the very least a great college player. That is a matchup that is uniquely bad for Owen Freeman, and it's not really anything that he has to worry about for any of the other 12 opponents in the Big Ten, or it's soon to be 16 opponents in the Big Ten. So I'm not too worried about that aspect of it per se. But it is also, I think, important to say, yes, Zack Edy's good at basketball. He's not just like super tall, and that can be really, really tough to deal with. But to that end, at some point you got to let these guys play, and you can't let this big Goliath dude with all these skills. You can't also be doing him favors and sending him to the line when he's able to be physical and push defenders out of the way on the other end of the floor, right? Like at some point it's got to be fair for all players, right? And I didn't really see that in the officiating for the game yesterday. Did you? I think I know you guys' answers already, but like, do you guys agree?
No, yeah,
Yep.
absolutely not.
Yeah.
I don't know that one. I think it was Tony Perkins. Edy was coming down the lane, and Tony jumped up and popped the ball out, and the ref from half court called the foul.
Yeah.
It was like 2 feet from the basket. It was high knees guy. I don't know. That guy on Twitter, they always tweet high knees. But he's like going like this, calling the foul. It's like, what? You're 40 feet away from the play. Like, what's going on here? And then
Yeah,
there was
Eliot, I think you were closer. I think you were literally closer to the play. Yeah.
Exactly. And then there was another play where these are the only two that stick out that kind of illustrate the point. But there was another play where Evan Braun's 6'9", he's just not got a lot of run this year. We'll say that. He got run yesterday because Lodgy got hurt, which, by the way, that looked like a really tough ankle sprain. That really looked like it hurt. Hope he can come back sooner rather than later. But Evan gets in, somehow jumps to the top of Edy's release point and swats it, and they called it a foul. I don't know. I don't know exactly what the call was, but if anything, it's a body, maybe. But he got all ball in the swat, and they give the call to Edy. Like, there's Reigning National Player of the Year calls if you're like a wing that maybe you get. If you're 6'8", you're a playmaker, you can throw it down, you can shoot from deep. But then there's 7'4", 300 pounds where you can already do whatever the hell you want, and you get those calls. And that's bullshit. Like, that's just not how you should officiate a game. And again, we're trying to be objective here, but like that's just bad. That's bad officiating. And of all the things you mentioned, Adam, you mentioned the skill. You mentioned how he can score. You mentioned that he gets to the free throw lines and he shoots at a consistent rate for being that freaking huge.
Yeah.
You throw all that together, if he gets a deep paint touch, it's over. That's a dunk every time. So the combination of those things is why he scores 30 points a game.
He barely has
Player of the Year.
He barely has to jump to dunk the ball. Like, it was just so ridiculous to watch him yesterday, and his feet barely leave the ground, and he's dunking. It's like, that's just not right.
Yeah.
It's not fair, but he's out there doing it, and we'll see if Purdue gets those favorable calls in the tournament, and that's generally why they don't end up going.
Bingo.
as some people think they should. But women's game starts here in about 10 minutes. It's 10:50 a.m. here on this Sunday. Do we want to talk about the women at all quickly before they tip off at Ohio State, Adam?
Yeah, I think we have to, because this is arguably, I would say, the second toughest game left in the regular season schedule for the Iowa women, and they're going to Ohio State, who's currently ranked number 18, and who is, I think, one of the few teams that is sort of built to give Iowa problems, because they have that like upper level talent level that very few teams, especially in the Big Ten this season, can match. That starts with J.C. Sheldon, and fans who have watched women's basketball especially saw her last season really break out for the Buckeyes. We're talking about, I think it's 17 points a game. Great shooter from distance, can make from inside too. Like, Sheldon will be in the WNBA. That's a stone cold lock. And speaking of future WNBA players, Cody McMahon, forward, not a big one, but she is super athletic, super skilled, and going to be a big matchup problem for someone like Kate Martin or Sita Fulter. Like, I'm expecting them to be in that mix defensively. Taylor Thierry, same situation, super skilled, can play on the interior, on the exterior. So Ohio State, from a personnel standpoint, has some dudes, gender neutral dudes, right? And Iowa's going to be playing on their floor. Like, they're going into Columbus, and Iowa already gets teams' best effort on road games to begin with, right? That, even when they're playing Rutgers or Wisconsin or what have you, they're getting A games from their opponents. And now here it's going to be coming from Columbus. That atmosphere is going to be bonkers, right? So this is going to be a tough game. And people are probably going to be listening to this podcast after the game is over. So it will have been a tough game. And J.C. Sheldon and Cody McMahon will probably have given Iowa difficulties by the time you're listening to this. But yeah, I think this is going to be Iowa's, between this and the trip to Indiana that's still upcoming, I think this is going to be Iowa's one of the toughest games of the year. A loss would not surprise me. And it would be disappointing for Iowa fans, absolutely. And it would get some negative attention. But it wouldn't quite surprise me, and it wouldn't necessarily, if I were a fan, it wouldn't discourage me either. Because ultimately, it's a road game in the Big Ten. You're going up against a top 20 team. Like, these are tough teams to beat. These are tough environments for any team, much less the bullseye on our back all-stars, which is what this Iowa team has become. So I'm very interested to see how this game will have shaken out. I'm interested to see how this game shakes out. Guys, you guys going to be watching this one?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I am getting some food once we're done here, getting the podcast uploaded, sitting down and watching some women's basketball here this morning.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. What network is it
100%.
on, Adam, while we have you?
Well, it is on the Peacock.
NBC.
I don't, yeah. Oh, it's on NBC proper?
Regular
okay.
NBC.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah. Yeah, same.
When I had put it in my calendars, Peacock only. So, whew. All right. Well, the game will have been on NBC. Like, Ross, why'd you even ask me that? The game's over.
All right. So I think that's it for us today. We will let you go, Adam, so you can cover that game, and we will all be watching it. So I hope you enjoyed our tweets / premium board posts now that you've listened after the game. Once again, thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Hotcast. If you're listening on YouTube, watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button, hit the bell so you don't miss an episode. Drop a like, drop a comment. What do you think about this edition of Kaden Proctor? Who will be the starting five on the offensive line for Iowa? And again, for the second video and podcast in a row, who do you think is going to be the offensive coordinator? Will you burn Kinnick to the ground? And if it is George Barnett or John Budmeier, let us know so we know to evacuate the area. And if you're listening on Apple Podcast, Spotify, please make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a rate and review. We know a lot of you listen on Apple Podcast. If you would leave that rate and review there, that would help us out a ton. We really appreciate it. If you're not a subscriber yet, you can do that at iowa.rivals.com/subscribe. We'd love to have you over there on the premium board. If you want to drop a question for us or drop any thoughts, you can do that by leaving a 5-star rate and review on Apple Podcast, as well as joining us on our premium board. You can always ask us questions there that we can hit on the podcast. Once again, my name, jeez. Once again, folks, my name is Eliot Clough, at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by Adam Jacoby and Ross Binder. For now, we will see you next time.